The office cafeteria buzzed with the chaotic energy of a midday rush, forks clinking against plates, voices overlapping in a symphony of corporate chatter. Maria, a quiet woman in her mid-40s, moved her mop across the tiled floor in the corner, her presence barely registering among the suits and ties. Her faded janitor's uniform hung loosely on her frame, her dark hair pulled back tightly, revealing a face etched with resilience. She worked methodically, eyes down, blending into the background like a shadow. Nobody paid her much attention, except to sidestep the wet patches she left behind. That was until Mr. Kessler, the company's brash CEO, stormed through the crowd, his tailored suit cutting a sharp silhouette, his voice sliced through the noise. "Next time, clean, faster, Maria," he snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. Before anyone could react, he grabbed a carton of milk from a nearby table and, with a smirk, poured it over her head. The white liquid cascaded down her face, soaking her uniform, pooling at her feet. The cafeteria fell silent, a collective gasp swallowing the air. Phones emerged from pockets, their cameras capturing every humiliating second. Maria didn't flinch. She stood still, milk dripping from her chin, and locked eyes with Kessler. Her gaze was steady, unyielding, a silent storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Nobody knew this janitor had once run a company larger than Kessler's entire empire, and nobody could have guessed that today, she was ready to take it all back. Maria turned and walked toward the back hallway, milk trailing behind her like a ghostly veil. Coworkers averted their eyes, some whispering behind their hands. "She always takes it," one murmured. "Never says a word," another added. They pitied her, assumed she was powerless, just another cog in the corporate machine. HR had, "I've already seen the footage circulating on phones," but they'd do nothing. Kessler was untouchable, a golden boy shielded by his connections and charisma. The employees thought Maria was defeated, broken by years of menial labor and public humiliation. They were wrong. She wasn't broken, she was biding her time. In a dimly lit storage room at the end of the hall, Maria knelt beside a rusted shelf, her hands steady, despite the cold milk still clinging to her skin. She reached for a dusty leather folder tucked behind a stack of cleaning supplies, its embossed label reading Brandtech Holdings. Her fingers traced the worn edges as she opened it, revealing a stack of legal documents, yellowed but pristine. These weren't just papers, they were proof. Proof that she owned 51% of the holding company that bankrolled Kessler's firm. Years ago, Maria Alvarez had been the co-founder of Brandtech, a visionary who built it from nothing alongside her late husband Alex. When he died, grief had consumed her, and she'd vanished from the public eye, stepping away from the empire she'd created. The world moved on, and Kessler, a ruthless opportunist, had slithered into power, believing the company was his to command. But Maria had never sold her shares. She'd kept them, waiting for the right moment. Now, her eyes narrowed as she closed the folder. It was time to clean up more than just spilled milk. She pulled out her phone, her hands no longer trembling, and dialed the number she hadn't called in years. "Mr. Devlin," she said, her voice low but firm. "Activate the clause." On the other end, the chairman of Brandtech Holdings paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yes, ma'am," he replied after a moment. "The board meeting is tomorrow." Maria hung up, her expression unreadable but resolute. She changed out of her soaked uniform into a spare set of clothes she kept in her locker, then walked out of the storage room, her steps deliberate, her mind razor sharp. The woman who'd been invisible for a decade was about to become impossible to ignore. The next morning, the boardroom gleamed with polished mahogany and the arrogance of power. Executives in expensive suits sipped coffee, their laughter filling the space as they waited for the meeting to begin. Kessler strutted in, his assistant trailing behind like a loyal shadow. He was in high spirits, tossing out a mocking comment about that janitor to his assistant, who snickered obediently. The room's energy shifted when Maria entered, no longer in her janitor's uniform but in a tailored black suit that hugged her frame with quiet authority. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her presence commanded attention, though she said nothing. Kessler's eyes landed on her, and he let out a sharp laugh. "What's this? Lost on your way to the supply closet?" he sneered, loud enough for the room to hear. A few executives chuckled, but others shifted uncomfortably, sensing something amiss. The chairman, Mr. Devlin, cleared his throat and stood. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, "Miss Maria Alvarez is our new acting CEO." The room went deathly silent. Kessler's smirk froze, then twisted into disbelief. "Effective immediately, Mr. Kessler, you're terminated." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Kessler's face flushed red, his voice rising to a shout. "This is absurd. She's a janitor, a nobody." Maria stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "I cleaned up your messes for years," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Now I'm cleaning up this company." The executives exchanged stunned glances as the reality sank in. Maria wasn't just a janitor, she was the majority shareholder, the hidden force behind Brandtech Holdings. The documents she'd guarded for a decade were now in play, and Kessler's reign was over. He stormed out, still shouting about lawsuits and conspiracies, but the boardroom was already shifting its allegiance. Maria took her seat at the head of the table, her presence filling the space where Kessler's ego once dominated. Word of the upheaval spread like wildfire through the office. Employees huddled in break rooms, whispering in awe as the story unfolded. The woman they'd overlooked, the one they'd pitied, was their new CEO. HR executives, complicit in ignoring Kessler's cruelty, scrambled to cover their tracks. Some resigned before the day was out. Old colleagues from Maria's past, those who'd known her as a titan of industry, flooded her inbox with messages of support and congratulations. As she walked the halls, no longer invisible, employees nodded to her with newfound respect. Some smiled, others stood a little straighter, inspired by the quiet woman who'd turned the tables on power itself. Later that evening, Maria returned to the janitor's closet, the place where she'd spent years blending into the background. She opened her locker, her fingers brushing against a small, framed photo of her and Alex, taken in the early days. Of Brandtech next to it was her old office badge, its title gleaming faintly. Maria Alvarez, founder and CEO. 10 years. Alex, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. I'm home. She placed her mop against the wall, its handle resting, beside a new edition of framed plaque that read Maria Alvarez, founder and CEO Brandtech Holdings. The juxtaposition was striking. The tools of her humility beside the symbol of her triumph. Maria's story wasn't just about revenge. It was about resilience, about the quiet strength that lies in patience and preparation. She'd spent a decade watching, planning, waiting for the moment to reclaim what was hers. Humility wasn't weakness, it was her weapon, honed in silence. The office would never be the same, and neither would the people who'd underestimated her. They'd learned a hard lesson. Never mistake a quiet demeanor for a lack of power. Sometimes, the ones who say the least are planning the most. If Maria's comeback got your heart racing, then you're in the right place. Here at Midnight Tales, we're all about stories that hit hard, lift you up, and leave you cheering for justice. From underdogs rising to epic showdowns, we've got tales that spark fire in your soul. Want more stories like Maria's, where the quiet ones roar the loudest? Hit that subscribe button on Midnight Tales and join our community of dreamers and fighters. Let's keep telling stories that strike back stronger than ever, because at Midnight Tales, we believe the best stories are the ones that remind you never to count anyone out.